Hey everyone, Gaijin here. So, I was at my local Kinokuniya bookstore the other day, just kind of thumbing through materials, looking for stuff for my shows on my main channel, like Yokai Hunters, Witch Ninja, so on and so forth, Culture Shock. And I found this one particular, pretty interesting book called Kaibil, the Supernatural Cats of Japan by Zach Davidson. And I looked at this and I thought to myself, this could be really useful and really interesting. There are a whole heck of a lot of different stories about cat yokai when it comes to Japan, things like Bakeneko and Nekomata. And I thought, you know, I'll pick this up, give it a thumb through, and maybe I can use it for a future video. And I was on stream when I was reading through this. I was reading this to my chat, and we got about halfway into the book. And in just a couple of pages, this melted my brain. I found the ancient origins of cat girls. Because this is the funny thing. I used to think, like I'm sure many other people do, that the concept of cat girls was something that came out of like the 1980s at the very earliest, you know? The golden age of anime, so to speak. No. The concept of cat girls has been around for over 300 years. And I know a whole lot of people out there are gonna be like, oh, well, I just hate cat girls. They're just, they're really sexualized and things like that. Guys, I got bad news for you. The origin of cat girls in their entirety came from yujo. Now, there have been other YouTubers out there who have talked more about yujo and oidan better than I could right here. I know that Lymphemy has talked about them in multiple videos to great extent, and I know that Ask Shogo has done a video on them as well, and both of them have fantastic information, like very specific information about what oidan and yujo were, so go check those out after watching this if you're curious about that kind of culture. But I'll just put it this way. Yujo were basically a class of entertainers that sold everything from dancing to late night promiscuousness. I'll just leave it at that. And the facility that they worked in was called a yukaku. And it's, on the outside, to foreigners like ourselves, it may look like just kind of culturally charged entertainment, like very Japanese looking. You've got really lovely ladies in these big elaborate kimonos, and you've got all this traditional Japanese food, yada yada yada. Well, a lot of them basically boil down into just being brothels. And as you might expect, this business was exceptionally lucrative and exceptionally popular, with, I believe, according to Shogo, there was about 20 yukaku just all across the country, with the biggest of these being Yoshiwara and Edo. And yeah, this was a huge business with a whole lot of competition. In fact, it came to a point that so many different yujo, and especially oidan, which are like yujo plus, they got so popular that they've eventually became idols. Something similar to what you might see with like girl groups, like maybe a few specific members of AKB48, but more topically, man, freaking VTubers these days. And by the way, shout out to Kiryu Koko. So as you might expect, because of these positions of power, there would be a whole lot of jockeying for popularity and attention to get more people in, to make more money. And this is really where the idea of the Bakeneko girl kinda came from. It was actually used for a tool to entice men. Now, I know some of the less yokai savvy of you out there who are watching this are probably asking, well, what the heck is a Bakeneko? Well, you know your little house cat that you've had for maybe a couple years? Well, the thing about cats, at least in the old Japan way of thinking, the old yokai way of thinking, is that when a cat reaches somewhere between 20 to 25 years and it's still alive and kicking, it starts to develop sentience, human-like sentience and magical power, and it grows. The older these cats get, the bigger they get, the smarter they get. They start speaking in human speech. They start getting upright and walking around with the intelligence of people, and they'll get about as big as a human too. And you might think to yourself, well, that's actually kind of cool. Why is this a problem? Well, because Bakeneko go from eating things like mice or fish or milk if you're a terrible cat owner, to basically feasting on the flesh of humans. So you can probably see how that would get really problematic. And oh man, too, if your old cat starts having a split tail, you need to get that out of your house immediately, because that means that your cat's turning into Nekomata. Nekomata develop far more insane powers, such as necromancy and pyrokinesis. So Yeah, having an old cat back in the day in Japan was kind of a huge liability. And you'd think that would drive men off. You'd think that would drive men away from wanting to spend any time with yujo that sort of took on that persona, right? Well, I'm gonna show you why and how that just really wasn't the case. I mean, let's be real here. How in the world did this concept of Bakeneko, of flesh-eating, hyper-intelligent humanoid cats, work its way into hostess and escort entertainment? Well, it all really got started with just a simple rumor. There was a rumor that there was a Bakeneko working as a Meshimori Onna, which is basically kind of like this low-cost sort of waitress, maid, escort, what have you. And she was apparently employed at Issei Inn at the Shinagawa-juku area of Edo. Well, I think we all understand what happens when gossip starts getting around. It got really, really popularized. Instead of it being this idea of, oh, don't go to Issei Inn, there's a freaking Bakeneko girl that works there. No, the whole idea got insanely popularized by art. Because remember, this is the Edo period, and this is the explosion of art and literature in Japan. And according to this book, and from a little bit of the research that I've been able to do, the very, very first artistic depiction of cat girls, essentially, came from the 1775 book Hanazumo Genji Biki, or The Courage of Genji at the Sumo Tournament, which tells of just a situation of this Bakeneko prostitute scattering fish all over the room with her mouth. And that really is the extent of that one section. But the thing is that one little scene got so popular that piece of art after piece of art after piece of art was made in reference to it, with sections of books, if not entire books, just following in its wake. Things like Urikotoba, or Words of a Seller, Harasuzumi Hesso Banashi Kyoku, or Songs of Belly Drumming and Navel Talking, except instead of scattering fish around, it was shrimp. And then finally, you've got the Koame Shu Ame Miko Matsukasu, or Anticipation of Seeing Things in the Rain, where this particular segment of this book talked about how there was a male patron looking in on his mistress of the evening who had transformed completely into their cat form, gnawing on a human arm in the dark. So yeah, safe to say, this idea of catgirl yujo got really, really, really popular and spread far, far out from Shinagawa. But that's not to say that hearsay and rumor was the only thing that got yujo catgirls popular in Edo. Because see, here's the thing about the Edo period. There was all this grandiose, highbrow, well-respected art. But at the same time, there was also some of the lowest of lowbrow art, particularly in the form of what are called Kibioshi, or yellow books, which were named because of their distinctive yellow covers. And the thing about Kibioshi is, on one hand, they could be some of the most spectacular and clever forms of art when it came to political and societal satire. But on the other end, there were a whole lot of Kibioshi that focused on the most primal instinct and desires of humans, so, you know, a lot like reality TV. And as you might expect, being material of questionable nature, there were scores upon scores of different stories of men going into these yukaku and spending the night with a woman who was far more than human. But the Kibioshi weren't the only Edo period books that would tantalize men with this idea of spending the night with a Bakeneko cat girl. There was also the Sharenbo, or guidebooks to all the different pleasure districts in the Ukyo, or basically the floating world. And within these books were detailed accounts of all these different entertainment establishments, such as kabuki and restaurants and, of course, escort company services. And within these two books and far more were woven all these different tales of men who would wake up in the middle of the night and look over to their lover of the evening, hunched over scraps of food, casting a feline shadow, gnawing at old fish, or perhaps at the very worst, a human limb. Now, while that may sound like a horrible, horrible experience for those of us outside of Japan, when it came to the Edo period, men were apparently really, really into that. And you might be asking yourself, Gaijin, why in the world would people in that time period be attracted to humanoid cats? And to that I say, consider Japanese yokai folklore for a hot second. This is a country that has had monstrous humanoids, monstrous sea creatures, monstrous everything for centuries upon centuries at this point, with stories coming from all over the country. But the thing about the Edo period is that this is when all of these stories from all these different parts of Japan came together and centralized in the capital. The country was finally at peace and unified for the first time in hundreds of years, so all these folk stories started to come together. And when they did, they were basically sort of evolved and changed into other ideas and other concepts and then redistributed all over the country. So when it comes to this odd concept of women transforming into cats, or cats having this ability to transform into beautiful human women. This is stuff that's been around for a long time. This isn't anything really new when it came to the people of the Edo period. Also consider too, you remember those Kibioshi that I mentioned earlier, those yellow books that were really, really good with satire? Well, the thing of the matter is, when it came to a lot of political and sociological satire, yokai were used constantly to kind of make fun of and look down upon some of the richer, more corrupt people in areas of government. So again, it's not like the idea of yokai, of humanoid monsters, was this brand new idea for folks in the Edo period. It's been around. Everybody knew about it. I mean, let's be serious here, everyone. Do you really think that this concept of furries that we understand today is a modern idea? No, this is something that's been around in multiple societies for a very long time. Moreover, do you think Bakeneko yujo cat girls are really the weirdest thing to come out of the Edo period? Because I'll just say this. I'm not telling you to look up shunga, but if you do, don't blame me, blame yourself, I warned you right here. All I'm saying is that Bakeneko yujo cat girls are definitely not the weirdest thing to come out of Edo period art, alright? Just trust me on that. Moreover, I think any historian out there would tell you, when it comes to the older time periods of the world, and when it comes to their super steamy stories, oftentimes creatures and characters of fantasy get involved, so really, this is nothing new. And when it came to the men of Edo, all of this was absolutely no exception. And as you might expect, as men became more and more fascinated with this idea of spending the night with a yujo cat girl, of this supernatural Bakeneko girl, tons of art was still pouring and flowing out of the capital. With art pieces like the Bakeneko Yujo from Urikotoba in 1777 that has a man walking side by side with his woman of the evening, not even bothering trying to look like a human woman. Things were just getting that accepting back in the Edo period. I mean, this was a humongous fad, and you better believe that the Yujo and Oiran in these yukaku absolutely took advantage of this. It was in this time that all these Yujo girls and all these different yukaku started to take in this brand of Bakeneko into their own specializations. For example, a lot of Yujo women would keep a lot of different cats as pets to sort of give this illusionary effect that, oh, maybe she's actually a Bakeneko, maybe they're actually following her as a supernatural cat. While others would change their name to make it sound similar to the OG Bakeneko cat girl from the Issei Inn. I mean, who knows? This may have been the birthplace for cat ears for all we know. Now, I'm sure there's a decent amount of you out there saying, Gaijin, this is actually really interesting and cool stuff, but really, aside from these rumors from Issei Inn, where did these stories of cat girls actually get their start? What is the actual explanation of this phenomena? Because as I've stated many times in this channel and in my main channel, yokai are the explanation of negative natural phenomena that can't be explained, and they're usually personified. So what's the deal with this? Well, three things come to mind. 1. Yujo women were not allowed to eat with their guests. It was their sole responsibility to entertain their male guests with food, drink, and... yeah, I kind of think you get the idea of where I'm going with that. I mean, I'd imagine that when their company had passed out maybe in the middle of the night and there were a few scraps left of their meal, these poor starving Yujo girls would be hunched over, either taking the food to a corner or maybe another room of the area and just quickly trying to eat as much of it as possible. Because you gotta understand, the average life of a Yujo woman was absolutely awful. Yujo girls were daughters and wives sold by their family into these establishments almost as slaves to pay off a debt that the family had racked up. You know that episode of Samurai Champloo where Jin took on that job selling eel at that stand and ran into that woman who was really talented and helped him out, only to find out that that poor girl was being sold by her husband to a brothel, and he basically busted her out at the end of the episode? Yeah, that is the truth behind Yujo and Yukaku. Now, that isn't to say that Yujo had to work at Yukaku their entire lives. In fact, by the age of 28, they were usually released. But here's the thing, the life expectancy of a Yujo was somewhere between early and mid-20s, where they would usually die of venereal diseases. So yeah, life for a Yujo was really freaking hard. Many of them died, like I said, either by venereal diseases, but also died of starvation and complete lack of sleep. So I would imagine that once their customer is conked out over in a corner snoring away, I'd imagine that any woman working at a yukaku would quickly just snatch up every little bit of food that they can, try to run off just in case their lover of the evening woke up in some kind of drunk stupor, and just gnawed as much food as they could, just kind of huddled over and hidden. 2. The only kinds of people that would actually have first-hand experience with Bakeneko Yujo cat girls would be those Yujo's customers. And these are going to be men who are likely drunk, very full of food, and probably very exhausted and dizzy waking up in the middle of the night. I mean, come on. We've all woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, possibly in a haze, and we're starting to see things in our periphery. Well, take that exhaustion, waking up in the middle of the night, and tack on many, many shots of sake and shochu, and also tack on this idea that people kind of believed in these ideas of yokai altogether, and yeah, I can't for a minute think that it would be unusual for a guy who's waking up in a drunken stupor to see his consort on the other side of the room, hunched over, possibly loudly gnawing at old scraps of food because these poor girls are starving, easily looking like a humanoid cat. I mean, that just makes sense. 3. Word association. Because if there's anything that I've learned about Japan linguistically, it's that they absolutely love wordplay, and I think these Bakeneko Yujo girls kind of took advantage of that. See, the kanji for cat, neko, is this. But if you took apart the two sounds, ne and ko, and replaced it with this kanji and this kanji, you have ne, which is ne for neru, like sleep, and then you have ko, or girl. So you have sleeping girl, and I think you can all kind of put together what this might actually mean together. Look, as someone who's been a part of the internet series Yes Yes Love Adventure Go, I've had my fair share of cat girls, alright? I've played through many of the Nekopara games, I played through many of the Nekonin games, but I tell you what, after learning all of this, I actually have some appreciation for cat girls. Because I've always believed in the idea that understanding history accurately is far more important than what you want it to be, what you rewrite it to be. I'm sure there are plenty of folks out there that just absolutely wish that this idea of cat girls came from something horrifying, like Bakeneko or Nekomata or any of the other kaibyo that exists out there in Japan. But I mean, that's just not the case. For all the maid cafes where we see girls in cat ears and tail, for all the cat girls that we see in romance games, for all the smutty cat girls that we see in like eroge and dojin, I'm sorry, but it makes sense. This concept of cat girls, of Bakeneko Yujo, was born from the Edo period's service industry in Japan, so why would it be so weird to think about seeing it in the Japanese service industry now? And yes, for as much as it may rub some of you the wrong way, the honest-to-God truth is that cat girls really did get their starts in the service industry, so to see cat girls in mature media, no one should be surprised by this. I mean, looking back at all this, I personally can't get upset at things like Nekopara or Nekonin anymore, because this is honest to goodness nothing new. These are things that have been around in Japan for over 300 years. It's culture. So really, for as much as I've made fun of it in the past, and as much as I'm sure a lot of other people have and will make fun of cat girls in the future, I just have a better understanding and appreciation for this gigantic butt of a joke that we keep rolling out. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that I or you have to completely immerse ourselves in it if we don't like it, but I respect it so much more because I understand where it comes from, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish in my work. The understanding and sharing of things that make us go, oh, Japan. Because in actuality, a lot of times we should look at ourselves and go, oh, us, for not taking the time to learn about where these things come from. Like, I think it's important for us to look at things like this. I think it's important for us to look at things that maybe we don't particularly like cat girls, because it's amazing what you find out learning about where they came from. And it just branches out into even more and more things. And I don't know. I just have a greater, maybe a little bit more affection, but a greater understanding and respect from where that whole trope comes from. So, anyway, pick up this book. Pick up Zach Davison's book of Kaibyo and Supernatural Cats in Japan. This is a really great book, not just because cat girls, but because of all the different supernatural cats that get talked about in this book. Pick this up. This is an amazing read. I will very likely come back to this later down the line. And speaking of coming back to things later down the line, this video was a little bit rough for me to put together, and I know that there's so much more out there about the history of cat girls, whether it be back in the 1700s in the Edo period or modern day. I know there's more information out there. I was so excited to talk about this. I wanted to get a Gaijin perspective on it because this is kind of my personal journey through understanding, holy crap, this is where cat girls come from. I really think on my main channel sometime down the line, I really want to do a more analytical breakdown of cat girls, get more examples, be more precise on things rather than just using a pseudo script and bullet points to talk to you all about it. But But yeah, I think I definitely want to put something together a bit more concise about the origins of cat girls, because there's still so much for me to piece together. But again, thank you all so much for watching. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get another video out by the end of the month. I'm kind of stuck in a backlog on the main channel, so if nothing else, I've got a lot more coming down the pipeline in July. I just thought that this would be a real killer of a video to throw out there, because I've teased you all for a long time about this, and I know there's more to say, and I want to do more, but I gotta stop right now. So thank you again, everyone, for watching, and until next time, this is Gaijin, signing out.